Hello, I'm Robert, and you're welcome here in my busy little shop. On today's episode of What's on My Workbench, I've got a cartridge belt that I've got to get working on, but I thought I would break one part of it out and make its own video on how to create the loops themselves, how to figure out the size, because I know that when I first started looking at doing a cartridge belt, I was somewhat intimidated by where to start. And there's lots of people who are like, well, go online, buy a pattern. I'm not that person normally. So I'm going to take you through the steps on how to figure the right spacing and amount of leather to make each of those loops. I appreciate you taking time to be within the shop today. Let's get over here on the workbench and get started on this. So when I first started making a cartridge belt, it was for a 38 special. And I made a mock-up like this to make sure that I had all of the spacing right and the amount of arch correct on there. And on the 38, the stitching lines on the cartridge part of this leather is 1 inch apart, but on the belt it's a 1/2 inch apart, creating that loop. Earlier this year I made a cartridge belt. Actually, it was for the same person as the 38, for 41. And on the 41, we were 1 1/8 of leather to create each loop. Instead of 1/2 inch apart, we were 5/8 of an inch apart. Now, this is, I don't have a 4570 cartridge. This is a 44, so it's going to be slightly smaller than the 4570 in diameter, but I think it's going to be close enough for what I need to do, because this leather that represents the cartridge loop part of it, it will stretch and form somewhat to, you know, the cartridge that you put in there. So what I'm going to do is, I think, well, what I did is I went and I put it on here and I tried to form around here the best I could. I put a mark here where I think the stitch line is going to be on each of these, and then I measured between there, and it is 1.25 inches. So to me that makes sense. The 38 was 1 inch, the 41 was 1.1 inches. This is a 44, and we're 1.25 inches. The one thing I'm going to do differently on this one, I want to spread the weight of all those cartridges out further on the belt. So I'm going to have a cartridge loop, and then I'm going to have a space between them, and I think I'm going to put a couple of spots in on it, and then I'll have another cartridge and another space. So now that I have that figured out, the only thing I need to figure out is on the 38, the space between the lines on the belt body itself was 1/2 inch. On the 41 was 5/8. I'm going to go with 3/4 inch. I think that's going to be about right. So I'm going to lay that out on here, and I will create the stitching holes, and I'll come back and I'll show you what that looks like when I'm done. I thought I'd show you here a little bit. I set my calipers for the 1.25 inch, and then this set for 3/8 of an inch. And so I would lay out the 1.25 inch, then the 3/8, then the 1.25 inch. Now I'm doing the same thing here on my practice or my mock-up belt side of it. 3/4 inch, then the 3/8 of an inch. You could use a pencil and go through there and create the same thing, but if you're off slightly, then you're going to get some variation there. So anyway, what I was going to say is you could mark it with a pencil instead of using the wing dividers or calipers to create the marks, but I want to be able to repeat it somewhat quickly and as accurately as possible. And if I create a pencil mark, unless it's a very sharp pencil mark, you can end up varying that quite a bit within the width of the pencil lead there, depending on which side of that line you are at. So once again, I'm probably making it more challenging than it needs to be, but I like it to look professional when it's done. Now I'll just line up here with my stitching chisel here on that line, and I might as well do it the way I would do on a belt. So on a belt, what I would do is I would create a line along the edge for the top of my stitching chisel as well on that belt. All right, now that I have laid out where the edge is of my stitching, or I should say of my cartridge strap, I will come back here with my stitching chisel, start up here at the top, get the square on here, and square up and create the holes. So I will do that on each of these spots along here. And then I've got to go over the 1.25 inches. And I have extra spots here. Let me make sure that's 1.25 inches of that one, and it is. All right, so you'll see that the pattern here will repeat across here. And I need to, keep in mind it's 3/4 inch for the cartridge here on the belt. And there's 3/8 inch between. I hooked the first one on the top edge of the leather. And keep in mind, this is the mock-up. I'll have to fine-tune some of the aspects of this when I get to the belt. Right now, all I'm trying to do is make sure that my loops are going to be the right size for the cartridge. Okay. So now what I need to do is I will stitch these in here, and it's going to go on like this, and then this next one here will get pushed up into a loop and I'll stitch it on there. So let me set up on my stitching pony over here and we'll get this stitched together. And I'm just going to use some thread that I purchased that I don't use a lot of, just to dispose of some of it here. All right, so here we go. I've got all my holes created. We're going to create this mock-up here, and I'm just going to use just a color of thread here that I have a lot of, that I really, after I bought it, I didn't really care that much for it. So I'm just going to start here, and we'll stitch this through. It may be easier just to do this in my lap instead of in the stitching pony, but it's hard for me to show you what I'm doing there. Sometimes creating these test pieces can feel a little bit like busy work, but the thing is, if I'm going to go through all this work, I want to make sure that it works out fine. And the other thing I have then will be a sample, and I'll have it marked of what size cartridge it is, and it'll probably help me down the road. As a matter of fact, that sample that I made for the 38, I've kept that around, and I was able to cut down on some of the learning curve here based off of that. So I think it's it's all valuable information that is hard to acquire without jumping in and doing it. And I think what I'll probably end up doing is when I create the belt, I'm going to continue this across and there'll be a hole here. So this will actually be shifted down a little bit. I'll just let you follow along here for a few minutes here while I create this mock-up. So I finished my mock-up here. I've got my stitch lines in here. The intention is to put spots between the cartridges, and it's obviously decorative in nature. And I just want to make sure there's room in here for that, and I think there's going to be plenty of room for that as well. And I can see a reason why this mock-up is good here, because typically when I stitch these cartridge loops on the back, I go at an angle from one to the next. I want to make sure that I don't create a spot here where I sever that. So I think when I stitch these, I'll come down here, I'll come over and go back up this way and then across. That'll keep me from having this angle between these two runs here. Anyway, so on the front, this is what it looks like here. There'll be spots in here. And let's see how these cartridges fit down through here. So in looking at this, it's got me wondering if I should tighten these up a little bit. Now the cartridge that we're going to put in, it's a little bit bigger than this, so that'll snug that up some. But I wonder, do I like this at an angle here, or do I want it more upright? It probably doesn't matter that much, but I think that if I brought it in here tighter and made it more upright, that the look would be neater that way. Let me put some spots in here and see how that looks. Now the thread's obviously not going to be blue. It's going to be off-white or a tan. I really wonder if I want wider here and narrower there. I don't think it needs to be a whole lot narrower or a whole lot wider. 3/8 and 3/4. So there's 5 rounds here. Yeah, I think I'm going to narrow this up. The spacing between the rows, probably just 1/16, and I'm going to widen this out. Instead of 3/8, I think I'm going to put 1/2 of an inch between those. How big is 1/2 of an inch? Yep, I think that's what I'm going to do. So instead of being 3/4 of an inch, I'm going to do 11/16 between the rows, and I'm going to do 1/2 an inch in the spacing here where the spots go, as opposed to the 3/8 of an inch. Well, there you go. I hope that following along today, really clarifies what some would say is a simple process, but when I first created a cartridge belt, I was like, where do I start? Well, I know how to make the belt. You probably do too. Now you know an easy way to go about finding out how much leather it's going to require and how to do your own test. And you could use this for other things. You may be making a rack to go behind your tool bench to put tools in. The process is kind of the same there. I appreciate you taking time to be within the shop today. Please like, share, and subscribe. But more importantly, I hope you have a great day.